I now welcome a leader in educational research and policy. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Elisabeth Rees, the Executive Director of Ontario's Institute for Studies in Education.
So as introduced, I'm Elisabeth Rees-Johnston, Executive Director with the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education. And the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education was founded in 1965 by the Ministry of Education in Ontario to be the research institute that would provide evidence to inform our ministry of the day and continues to today to ensure that any policies, any implementations, any efforts were in fact evidence-based. So we were brought into ACT in 1965 with a mandate to not only conduct research in studies in education, but to also advance that research and think about the dissemination of the research, but how we would facilitate that research into further practice. And so I'm very fortunate that within the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education, I oversee all things on the innovation side. And I'm here to talk to you a little bit about the innovations in early childhood education. And we'll see if we can get some of the models up to showcase. When we think about early childhood education, there's been much research that's advised us that early childhood education now, we understand that's a critical investment that needs to be made, that regardless of where in the world, if we're focusing on human capital, we have far more understanding that the investment that we make in early childhood reaps significant benefits in the long term. It's an early investment that has longitudinal. We understand that building the foundational skills in literacy, numeracy, social emotional learning has huge impacts for better health outcomes and for a more productive workforce as we advance along. We also understand more about the economic benefits of early childhood education, where our economists can advise us that for $1 spent in early childhood could reap an investment return of $4 to $15 in return. And not only is it having an impact on longitudinal, it's having an impact very locally. That not only are we investing in the work for the future, but we're investing in early childhood education today. We're also supporting greater participation of families in workforces today. That's, of course, contributing to the economy now, but we're also investing into the future. So this whole progress on early child education has been fundamental to the research and focus here, and not here in the UAE, but here when I think in Canada, still dealing with jet lag. And the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education has been critical to that evolution. And what I wanted to share a bit today was a bit of the ecosystem that we've worked to develop and the story of our researchers, the institutions that we built in around the research to mobilize the research and bring that further into professional practice. Our research has resulted in longitudinally, over 40 plus years, we've been focused on examining all things early childhood. That resulted in an advancement, particularly when we hit around 2010, 2014. We introduced a new Education Child Care Act that fundamentally brought professional development to the forefront, where we recognized the further requirement for professionalization of early childhood education skills, and the connection between what we do in early childhood and how it transfers into primary education and the evolution into secondary education and beyond. In the introduction of that act, we also introduced an additional framework that we refer to as the ELECT framework that introduced for educators further understanding around play-based pedagogy. Back not too long ago, we may have examined and thought of play as something that was fun. We didn't understand the pedagogical, and if we could actually develop the methods in and around play, we could have a significant impact again on social, emotional, cognitive development, literacy, language, capability, etc. Our work at the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education has advanced some of those mechanisms. And so our research has been fundamental in three core areas, I would say. One in the area of policy and development, where we, as a result of the research, demonstrated the longitudinal impacts, introduced the commitment to full day, what we refer to as our kindergarten, that was a result of our studies. We also were able to influence the further policy that brought introductions into our Act. Our efforts and our work in play-based learning have demystified some of the methodologies to be able to effectively train and further develop our educators in these methodologies and introducing it into curricula, but also really into effective practice. And we continue to tweak and learn about those methods. And then it takes us into the examination of educator qualifications and certification. And I'm seeing a thumbs up, so I'm going to fast forward. Thank you so much. Some of our investment and the build about our coherent system. Thank you, I appreciate the visual. We have what we call the research and the infrastructure and the professional development that we refer to as our blueprint for innovation. That the research is fundamental to creating the inquiry and providing the evidence, but how that research is further mobilized requires infrastructure. And I'll share a bit about the examples of where we have opportunity to apply and further develop the learning, and how does that further generate into professional development. Some examples I was referring to of our research that has been a really big part of our journey, from assessment and determining the access and quality determinants has been, again, based on longitudinal, multi-decade studies, and our work in play-based and further child development. And as I was just relaying on educator qualifications, our studies are focused right now on what are the optimal learning environments for educators in play-based methodology. How do we create the conditions for those educators to further develop and advance their practice? And what constitutes the most effective criteria for educator qualification in early childhood education spaces? All right, infrastructure. So 2 areas of infrastructure that we've been focused in developing is referenced as lab schools. And you may, for those of you who have come and visited us, and of course the door is open, I encourage you to, is our world-renowned Jackman Institute for Child Study, which is a lab school of where we have the researcher and the practitioner working side by side, and the researcher able to observe and get insight into the various things, one being the application of play-based pedagogy, but also further understanding and observing from a child developmental standpoint as well. So educator development and child development. The practitioner naturally becomes a teacher of inquiry and is further able to develop their research capabilities. And so you have that reinforcing agent of the research and the practice, which of course is some of what we've heard about in our conversations over the course of yesterday and today in this wonderful summit. Another area of infrastructure that's been very helpful in our world is our Atkinson Center, which is helping in the transference of policy. How is it that we, from the research, have an insight into wanting to make change to policy for the process and the evolution to advance that policy? And then, of course, leading to that professional learning. And professional learning covers a wide span of formal and informal engagements and activities. Within some of our activities, we have gone so far as to introduce the Doctor of Education in Child Study and Education for those who are wanting to further inform and advance in their research and their practice. And this gets further reinforced through our institutes and the Jackman Institute of Child Study, both through formal research and further development. Our Master of Arts as well is part of that pathway. And of course, our early childhood educators have a vast array of education opportunities beyond their initial diploma that they may have completed to actually be able to be employed in the sector, is a commitment to the continuous improvement and a whole host of variety of opportunities for further professional development. Part of the Act, when we introduced, and this came from the research, was a necessary commitment to the ongoing professional development of early childhood educators, as we have done so for educators in primary, secondary, and beyond. So the same commitment is being made. And so where are we going to next? Well, and a little bit of what we've learned. Certainly, what we've learned is that research, policy, and professional learning need to be interconnected. And we've heard some of those themes over the course of yesterday and today, the criticality of the research and the practitioner, and where and how they're interconnected, and what are some of the outputs from that, and what are these loops, these dynamic process loops that bring it all together and create coherence in our system. The early child education quality is very much a workforce investment. It requires a recognition of that investment, but we're not only preparing our workforce now, we're preparing it for the future. And we have the research that further advises us on that. And also the lab school. The idea of the infrastructure, the models of where we can bring researchers and practitioners into common spaces of practice and application accelerates what we would call impact. Where are we seeking to inform next? Naturally, as we've heard all through our time here over yesterday and today, no question there's the area of AI. What does it mean when we think about early childhood education and the impact on pedagogy? We currently have studies in the works in that regard. But what's interesting when we think about all that we're evaluating and seeking to examine on technology, we're as focused in the role of nature and connection to play. What we heard from our futurist at the beginning of yesterday, at the start of the summit, was where and how learning happens. It's not something that resides solely in the brain. It's something that is really very much physiological. And so that's something that's just so curious when we think about, for all that we speak on digitization, we also need to really understand the value of the natural environment. And that's where some of our efforts in our studies that are influencing in practice what we're seeing in formal structures such as playgrounds and how we're seeing active play and the environments for active play. Technology, we know is having an impact on our developmental capabilities from a cognitive to social emotional. We're seeking to understand what more the longitudinal impacts of that will be the implications to us as educators. Of course, the lab school continues to be something that we tweak and are part of an international consortium of lab schools, and how it is that those types of structures advance and support our scalability. And then finally, workforce strategies, where and how some of our activities are informing on our workforce strategies. So just a little bit of insight on research into practice in early childhood education, and I will conclude there as my time is up. Thank you so much.